They probably decided by 1973 that they wanted to get us out. And they spent, we finally left in April of 75, like 2 weeks before Saigon fell. So it took them all that time to scramble around looking for options. So they tried, they pursued a lot of different things. They talked to smugglers, they talked to Americans whom they thought might be able to get us out. My mom worked, they both worked for the US Embassy, my dad part-time, my mom full-time. Her boss, she was at USAID, which, at the time, it's kind of like common understanding that there were a lot of CIA agents in there. But she worked on actual aid programs, and her boss, her American boss, promised to get us out. But he didn't give her anything concrete, as time went on. So that last day, the day right before we left, my father went to work at the embassy, and his American boss gathered all the Vietnamese employees, who were all men. And that commander told his employees that they could get the men out, the employees, but they wouldn't be able to bring their families along, which, to a room full of Vietnamese men was like a non-starter. So my dad left. He was pretty depressed, and he was riding his motorbike home, and he drove by this naval medical center where my uncle worked for the US Navy. My uncle's commander had just told his Vietnamese employees that he'd be able to get them and their families out. So my uncle waved my father down, and the two of them hatched this plan to go gather all of their families and the rest of my mother's relatives, because my dad knew that most of his relatives wouldn't want to go or couldn't go. They didn't have any connections to Americans. They had all stashed, like they had all had luggage packed and their paperwork packed, ready to go for months and months and months ahead of time. So they eventually found all the siblings that they could. And then my family drove to the airport, or drove to a bus and then bus to the airport. And we slept at the airport overnight. And then the next morning, like at dawn, we shipped out on one of the last cargo flights to leave Vietnam before the North Vietnamese bombed the airport. When we were acting things out, because part of his training was psychology, so like theoretically he got it, but it's a different thing to mesh all that theory with like culturally how he was brought up. So there was not a lot of working through things. There was very little explanation of things. They kept us safe. They kept us housed and fed, and it was really important to them both, but especially my dad, that we got good educations. And he in particular made a point of enriching our lives. Like he got us music lessons and summer camps and things that we didn't ask for, like we didn't know to ask for those things, and he got us those things. But he I don't think they knew really what was going on for each of us, and each of the 4 kids was experiencing their own different thing. My baby brother was happy-go-lucky because you're 3 years old. It's like, so what? You learn a new language. It's your life. He never had a Vietnamese accent. My older brothers still have Vietnamese accents. I was the odd one in the middle. Yeah. So it's a pretty messed up way to grow up, because you look pretty normal. And so people aren't prepared. People aren't looking for how they can help you because you look pretty normal. Phenomenon called dissociation. And there's a wide range of what dissociation means, right? It can be very common at the mild end, The classic example is you're driving on the highway and you suddenly realize you've gone 20 miles and you don't remember any of them, right? Because there was a part of your brain that knew the road so well and knew how to control the steering wheel and watch all the traffic that you just did it, while another portion of your brain was thinking about something else, like the book report or your girlfriend or whatever. That's classic dissociation, and it's not trauma related. It's just kind of like naturally what the brain does. When a person experiences severe enough trauma, it's not a given, but a certain type of person will tend to dissociate in a way that's defensive. And what happens there is you kind of block off parts of your sense of self. And at its extreme, it's what people used to call multiple personality. But it's like a wide range of how it can manifest. So I was never quite way at that spectrum, at that other end of the spectrum. Like I never had blackouts. I never had, different my personalities doing different things that I wasn't conscious of. But I was way closer to that end than I was to that end. So I created invisible characters in my head. And I didn't realize until I was an adult that they were parts of me. Like I was projecting my own characteristics and situations onto them. And I had put them outside of myself. I had said, over there's this kid named Michael, and here are the things happening to him. And here's how he's dealing with it. And he's my best friend. And, he's going to take care of me and he's going to coach me and all of these things. And we would spend glorious hours together. So I had this experience growing up where occasionally people would say to me, you seem like you're really kind of distant right now. And I didn't piece it together that, those were all the times that I was with Michael, that I actually was distant because I had left some chunk of myself to be the physical mind and another part of me was somewhere else. It tends to be creative personalities that go this route in response to trauma or stress. And it got worse over time. So it became more dense. It became a more core part of my survival strategy. And I didn't understand what was happening until I had basically panic attacks when I was 38 years old and ended up in therapy. And I discovered this. My therapist didn't say, you're dissociative. He just kind of opened things up, and this is where we figured it out. I figured it out. So